and welcome to the second session devoted to the Arctic. We're going to talk today about the science and education. And first of all, I would like to thank our great speakers and experts for joining us from different geographies and different parts of this world. And also, I would like to thank our audience, the very curious audience from the other side of the screen for joining and listening. And I hope that you will enjoy our session and our discussion. This is the session organized within All Russian Festival of Science, and there is a special second session on the roundtables, the discussion, the dialogue on present and the future with the international scientists. And we are happy to have our great experts on board, as I said, to talk about the science and education. And our last session has been devoted to socioeconomic, ecological systems. And we actually ended up on Monday, and you can also see the recording of the session here at the website, roundtables.festival.ru. And we ended up our great session on the discussion about the education and science and why they are important for the Arctic itself and for keeping the legacy of knowledge. And I would like to give a floor to our first great speaker, who is actually joining us from Iceland, Reykjavik, from the Great Arctic Circle Conference. And we are passing our warmest greetings to that amazing event. Henry Burgess, Vice President of the International Arctic Science Committee and the UK IAS Council member, alternate UK delegate to the Europe and Polar Board. Henry, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much for that warm welcome and welcome everyone. If you just bear with me a moment, I will share my screen and get my presentation online. Great. Hopefully you can all see that. Right. Great. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the opportunity. As Julia said, my name is Henry Burgess, and I wear several hats. One hat is Vice President of the International Arctic Science Committee, and my other hat is as head of the UK's Arctic Office, and that supports scientists across the whole of the UK to make international connections with colleagues all across the Arctic and beyond, and particularly to look for new international initiatives and kind of cooperation and new partnerships. And it's a privilege to have worked with Julia on contacts between the UK and Russian scientists, and also with Kirsty and Mari, who are the other speakers here today. As Julia said, I'm at the Arctic Circle Assembly in Reykjavik, which is the first time I've been able to travel, like many of us, since March 2020. So I will stay in this session as long as I possibly can, but forgive me, I will have to leave at some point and rejoin the conference. So what I wanted to talk about is the International Arctic Science Committee, and to give you a sense of what we do and what more we could do together, particularly with the kind of the aspect of education in mind and international connections. So IASC, International Arctic Science Committee, is a non-governmental international scientific organization. And the mission essentially is to facilitate cooperation in all areas of Arctic research. All countries engage in Arctic research and in all areas of the Arctic regions. And we're not looking to duplicate initiatives that are happening nationally in existing countries, but we're looking to kind of add value and make new partnerships together, and particularly to share experience and understanding with the aim of understanding more about change in the Arctic and its role, not only the role of science in the Arctic, but particularly the connections between the Arctic and the world as a whole. So IASC was established in August 1990. And we're very proudly one of the first international organizations focused on the Arctic. We are older than the Arctic Council. We're both young organizations, but IASC was established kind of right at the start of that new period of dialogue and optimism and hope in the early 1990s. And we see ourselves ambitiously, but also kind of cautiously, we hope, as a model for scientific collaboration in the north. So everyone participates in IASC on the same basis. All countries have the same status, all countries can participate. If you are a country that has an engagement and interest that does Arctic science, then you can join IASC. We're very proud that the Arctic states themselves were kind of part of the first wave of organizations and that joined the International Arctic Science Committee. And in fact, it was their initiative that created us. But all countries have the same status now within the organization and have the same voting rights and responsibilities. So who are we? We have 23 member countries, and I'm very pleased to say there are some new countries who are expressing interest in joining IASC, which is fantastic news. The more we can grow our family, the better. So we have 23. We have 5 working groups: atmosphere, cryosphere, marine, social and human, and terrestrial. And we'll come on to those groups a bit later on, but those groups really are the heart of what we do. And then we have 18 IASC fellows. We'll talk about that a bit later on. And you can see we have 32 IASC activities which have been funded, and we'll come on to some of those as well. So in total, you can see that this is an extremely active organization. We have a full role as an observer country within the Arctic Council and the discussions, and we are part of the International Science Council. So we have that kind of that structure and that and those connections. The IASC Council, and this is a photograph of all the different members at one of our meetings, is the sort of the democratic heart of the organisation. So all the decisions are taken by this council once a year in its annual meetings. And as I said, all the different countries, all 23 countries, have the same status and the same responsibilities. Yeah. So some of these, I'm conscious that some of the names here are a little bit small for you, but you may recognise people from across the Arctic world. Colleague Vladimir Pavlenko from Russia is represented there and is the Russian representative on the council. We also have an executive committee which helps steer the business of IASC, but is very much responsible to the council, and that helps kind of guide what we do. So I'm on the executive committee, and Larry Hinsman from the US is the president, and then Vladimir Pavlenko from Russia, along with Paula from Finland and Hiroyuki from Japan. And we're very pleased that Gerlis Fugman, who used to be part of APEX at the international level, used to head up APEX, is our executive secretary, and she's based up in Akureyri in northern Iceland. There is also a secretariat, as I mentioned, that Gerlis Fugman has up. And the reason I mention the secretariat is particularly for the people down at the bottom, on that bottom row there, the secretaries of the working groups and of ISERA. And the secretaries do an enormous amount of work to support the work of the working groups and IASC as a whole. And these are a really good way of engaging with IASC at a practical and meaningful level. These positions are not paid, but they are supported financially for travel and attendance at conferences. And these positions rotate very regularly. And when we need a new secretary for one of the working groups, then we advertise across the IASC family. So if you're watching this and you're interested in getting connected to IASC, then this is one of the ways, and there are others that we'll come on to. This is one of the ways of getting kind of meaningfully involved in IASC. It's good experience, it's good skills, you meet lots of new people, and it's a really valuable job, and it's very, very much valued by the members of the council and beyond. So if you're particularly interested in one of the working groups and the work of that group, then these secretaries are often the first person that you could contact and work with. So as I said, we have these working groups, the 5 working groups: atmosphere, cryosphere, marine, social and human, and terrestrial. And they really are the proper scientific heart of IASC. They identify and formulate the science plans. They are advisory boards to us at the council and the executive committee, and they help make sure that our focus is resolutely on the science rather than on what can happen with big organizations is it becomes kind of an end in itself and we get bedded down in the bureaucracy. But having very strong working groups is something that is very important to make sure that we concentrate on what we need to do to support science and new initiatives, and all the people that are part of those working groups are nominated from within the council members. So each council member can nominate 2 people for each working group. And those nominations for the working groups, those memberships, you can only do 2 lots of 4 years. The idea is that it retains its vigor and turnover, so it's different people and isn't just the same faces decade after decade. So these working groups really are the heart of IASC. One of the important connections that we make is with what's known as ICARP, which is the International Conference on Arctic Research Planning. And this is a process that happens every 10 years, every decade. And it's looking at the future of Arctic science and what more we need to know and how we need to know it, and what the priorities should be. So it's a really good opportunity to look forward into the future, to see what's coming, and to ensure that the Arctic science institutions and researchers are kind of set up for that process as well as possible. And it's a long-term initiative, and it takes quite a long time to work through, and that's because it is very consultative. You can see all those logos at the bottom of the screen there, and all of those and many more are the kind of organizations that are engaged in this. And I mention it here because it's really important to know where IASC gets its kind of legitimacy from, essentially, and ICARP is a big part of that. IASC has a role in helping to organize the ICARP process, but it's very much shared with those other institutions that you can see here as well. So we help to organize it, but we don't control it in that sense. But it does help set the priorities for the coming decade. And you can see that those 3 bullet points there are the ones that were identified in the most recent version in 2015, 2016. It's the role of the Arctic in the global system, observing and predicting future climate dynamics and ecosystem responses, and then understanding the vulnerability and resilience of Arctic environments and supporting sustainable development. And I mention it there because that links very closely to the work of the individual working groups. So we don't say to each working group that they need to start from scratch in thinking about their priorities. We ask them to build off the ICARP priorities. So the priorities that the community as a whole, the whole of the Arctic research community has developed along with other institutions, should inform what the working groups themselves are planning and how they plan to spend their funds and their money. And that then is incorporated within our wider strategic plan. And that's particularly important because the working groups do have money to spend, not enormous research grants, but they have very useful sums of money to support work, networking and conferences and opportunities and kind of practical pieces of work that help advance the priorities within ICARP and also the individual priorities within the working groups. And in addition to that, there are opportunities to combine work between the different working groups in cross-cutting themes. And I'm very pleased to say that all the money that the different council members contribute goes into kind of active spend by the working group. So none of that money gets taken up by salaries and by bureaucratic costs, but all of it essentially goes to the work of the working groups and others. One of the things that we've changed recently, and this came about as a result of a piece of work led a couple of years ago by a special action group, was looking at the state of Arctic science. So this was not a piece of work to produce figures, scientific figures on the Arctic itself, because that already happens. There's a state of Arctic kind of report. But we wanted to look at what the state of the science was like. So what the gaps were, what existing priorities were, kind of new things that are happening, where the gaps are, and kind of emerging issues of concern. So we produced one of these last year, and then we renewed it this year in 2021, and we'll be launching that and kind of promoting it further, or promoting, not launching, at the conference here that I'm at. And this is a really interesting look. It's quite a short document, only a few pages long, and it was produced with the working groups. But it was very much to have a snapshot, a glimpse as to what more we needed to know about and what more we needed to do when it came to the priorities for Arctic science. So we hope this is one of the ways that IASC members will be influencing what happens back in their own institutions and back in their own countries. So that knowledge comes forward into IASC, we synthesize it, and then it can come back out to the countries themselves to help inform how they fund science and beyond. I'll just cover a couple of quick action groups that we also have working at the moment or recently. And a really important one is the action group on Indigenous engagement. And this report has been submitted and we are now taking forward its recommendations. But you will be aware absolutely about the growing importance of Indigenous engagement in science in the Arctic, not just in a consultative role, but in a genuine participation and empowerment and ability to make kind of choices, particularly involving the recognition and incorporation of traditional and local knowledge. So this is worth a kind of presentation on its own, but just to say that IASC is very much aware and alive to these issues, and we will be taking forward the recommendations in this action plan to make sure that we change and modernize IASC when it comes to Indigenous engagement. The other area that we are looking at in particular is an action group on our carbon footprint. So this work has only really just begun, and we're just getting into our stride now. And although results are expected next spring, I suspect this will be a much longer running initiative. So we are looking, as all organizations are and must do, at how to minimize our impact on the climate and particularly to how to minimize our carbon footprint. So I won't prejudge what this will come up with, but I hope this will be a range of kind of interesting practical things that IASC can do and that we can endorse to make sure that we are doing the right thing and particularly being seen to do the right thing when it comes to response to climate change. So this is a good thing to watch in the future. Our big get together, if you like, is the Arctic Science Summit Week, which began in 1999. And it's an umbrella event, if you like, that incorporates IASC's own events together with lots of other community meetings and initiatives all across the Arctic research and science world. The next one of these is in Tromsø in Norway at the end of March, and it will be a hybrid event. So it'll be in person and online. And my understanding is that the online engagement will be free, so you can register for this and attend for free online. That's at least my understanding at the moment. And if you haven't heard of ASSW before, I particularly recommend kind of getting involved in this this week, because it is a fantastic way to network and to meet people. And if you can do it online, so much better. And you will meet a large number of people in a very friendly, convivial, informal setting. And I really do kind of recommend it if you can get engaged. One of the things that's particularly good about the Arctic Science Summit Week is the connection between the IASC Fellowship Programme and ASSW. So this is a fellowship programme that's offered every year by IASC for fellows under each of the working groups, and also now Indigenous fellows, to get involved for several years in the work of IASC. And in return for your commitment to support IASC and get engaged in its work, there is a travel bursary and kind of wider support. And it really is a good initiative to get involved in as a early career researcher. Several of, at least one of the people you can see there in the middle, Jo Browse, from the UK, started out as a fellow for the Atmosphere programme, and she is now the UK's representative on that programme, as an example of the kind of progression you can make kind of within this. So I think that the fellowship programme has been launched recently and is now live, and I think it's until the end of November, the applications for this. So do check out the fellowship programme on the IASC website. It's really, really something that's worthwhile doing. A lot of people apply, but the odds are not impossible. So if you're interested, do go for it. It'd be a really good thing to do. I also wanted to mention the ISERA group, International Science Initiative in the Russian Arctic. And this is not a working group. It has its own status within IASC. but it's a long-running initiative to assist Russian Arctic science and sustainable development in the Russian Arctic by doing all the things you can see here. And I'm very grateful to Yulia, who is the secretary of this group and has provided fantastic support to it over several years. And I'm very grateful to you, Yulia, for that. So ISERA is a really important advisory group within IASC, and we're looking to extend its impact and renew the activities within that in a way that supports scientists in Russia and also those that want to work with colleagues in Russia. So I would advise you to find out more about ISERA and get involved if you would like to. It's a really, really good initiative. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, so I won't go into all these in detail, but just to say that whilst the focus of IASC is absolutely on the science itself, we are also very keen to make sure that we connect to policymaking and decision makers. So we have these very close links with the Arctic Council, and we are connected to the polar years as they've happened in the past, and we're very ambitious and hopeful for another polar year quite soon in the future, and we'll get engaged in the planning of that. And we've also been involved in the Arctic Science Ministerial meetings that have happened starting in 2016 in Washington, and then in Berlin and Tokyo this year. So we are all about the science, but the policy links and those connections are very important to us as well, and I think they will grow in importance as we go forward. More or less the last slide now. So our website is there, www.iasc.info, and that really is worth following through. There is a mailing list that you can subscribe to. We have a Twitter account, and you can follow all of that there. So I would very much kind of signpost you towards that if you want to know more, and particularly if you're interested in the fellowship program or the secretaries or the Arctic Science Summit Week coming up. So thank you. I will leave it there. These are our details at the bottom of the screen. I'll put my own details in the chat function so you can contact me if you would like to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry. This is a very comprehensive presentation, detailed one, and also I would like to say that IASC is a truly international science body, and I am very proud to be the part of the Secretariat because it's an amazing experience, as you have said. I just want to probably not to ask, but comment over here while Henry is with us. You mentioned the 4th International Polar Year, and I came to Arctic cooperation stage, I think, during the 4th International Polar Year as a very early career researcher, and I usually call myself a baby of IPY. This is an interesting thing because I have seen all this path on my own experience, how this all has changes and how the work within the international organizations has helped me to make a lot of interesting collaborations at the international and Arctic level, and also have a lot of colleagues around the world. It's truly amazing environment. And also I would like to say that I was quite curious to know that IPY and IASC actually was one of the driving forces behind IPY, all IPYs, and currently planning the other IPY. That's been a lack. The 4th International Polar Year, one of the priorities that has been actually mentioned at the international level, that it's been a little bit of a lack of the continuity of knowledge, of scientific knowledge in between different IPYs. That's why it was one of the major aim for the 4th IPY. And it is great to see how IASC actually implement different mechanisms to ensure the continuity of knowledge, to ensure the legacy of knowledge, which are, as you mentioned, ICARP itself, right? The International Conference on Arctic Research Planning, the Indigenous Engagement Action Group that you also have mentioned, and also the fellowship itself, Early Career Researchers Fellowship. So that was just a brief comment. Maybe our other speakers have something to say or a comment also to Henry's presentation. Because I know that Arctic has a lot of collaborations with IASC, and it's great to see that international organizations work in such a collaborative environment to ensure that we all have this let's say trans-organizational knowledge exchange and knowledge engagement. Yeah, so I think that if there is no any other comments, I don't have anything particular. Oh, maybe I also have quite a few brief notes here while you've been talking, Henry, and I just want to ask if you see that this state of Arctic science that you have mentioned, the report, you said that it was launched just recently, and you intend to make it the publication, the every year publication. Do you think it will help first that it is to highlight the priorities for current Arctic research and maybe something for the following ICARP and IPY? And I think that it would be great to see the different number, maybe in some of the years, to see the state of the Arctic report and evaluate after a few years how the priorities has changed. That would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Thanks, Yuli. Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's early days for the report, so it was a bit of an experiment at the start. I mean, a good one, I think, and I think it's been worth doing. And it's unlikely to change a lot from year to year because the big questions that we're asking about the Arctic and the big gaps that there might be in our knowledge and our ability to cooperate, they won't change enormously from year to year. But I think it is worth still updating the report on a yearly basis so that we can say that it's current. And I think it's just the kind of initiative that IASC should take. If IASC isn't doing this, then really who else should? But it's very much kind of a snapshot in time. So it's using the knowledge within all the working groups, all the skills of those 190 kind of plus people to bring together that knowledge. And we want to keep it focused on not specific pieces of science about the Arctic, but the state of Arctic science itself. So what more we need to know, where we're doing well, where there's more to do, where there's particular opportunities. And I hope it will feed into ICARP and the planning for the IPY, along with University of the Arctic and all the other colleagues who are many organizations and colleagues that are supporting that process and are in partnership with it together. So yeah, I hope it will be a really good initiative. And as with all these things, it imposes more work on the people that have to bring them together. But I think as long as we keep it short and sharp and focused, and particularly that it's in a language that the people that fund science and that politicians and decision makers can understand, and that I can understand, the better. And I think that will keep it a really good and useful product.
Yeah, thank you so much, Henry. And on this note, I would like to pass the microphone to our next great speaker, Kirsi Latola, research coordinator from the Tuuli University University of Oulu, Finland, and the chair of the European Polar Board and Arctic Vice President Networks. Kirsi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia, and many thanks for inviting me to join this round circle discussion. So I will just share my screen. Here we go, and then I will remove it. So what I will do today is that I will give you a short introduction to University of the Arctic and particularly its thematic networks, which is a kind of a tool within Arctic for cooperation and cross-border issues. And the cooperation that we do in Arctic is mostly in education and in research and knowledge sharing. But as already mentioned many times, we cooperate a lot with the other Arctic organizations, mostly with IASC and JASA. We have sat together in Arctic Council observer meetings and so on. So we have a very long cooperation. And I will have a few words about that as well. But before going into that, a few slides about University of Arctic itself, what it is and who we are. So University of Arctic is a network. It is a university without the walls. It's a network of universities, colleges, research organizations, and other organizations concerned with education and research in and about the North. And we often talk about North. I remember yesterday or on Monday when you had that roundup other discussion, you were discussing about what is North and what is Arctic. And in Arctic, we often use the slogan that it's not the latitude, it's the attitude. And that's why we are welcoming a lot of also other organizations who are not necessarily above Arctic Circle. Anyway, the whole idea behind the Arctic is that by pooling the resources and by working together, we can enhance more and we can do a much more collaboration, and we can benefit also the smaller northern institutions and universities. And through the cooperation in education, research, and outreach, we increase the human capacity in the North. We promote the viable communities and sustainable economies. And of course, we do a lot of global partnership. We were created to Arctic Council, so we are really an Arctic Council's baby. And this year is actually our 20th anniversary. And we were able to have the first face-to-face meeting in September 6th this year in Rovaniemi when we had a 20th anniversary seminar. We had some people on site, like myself. I was able obviously go, I just have to drive to Rovaniemi, which is very close by where I live. But we also have messages from Russian Arctic Council chairmanship and so on. Currently, Arctic is also an association based in Finland. So we have changed our status. We have over 230 members. We have the members, they belong to two different categories. They are either higher educational institutions or other organizations. And we do have an Arctic and non-Arctic members. In the beginning, it was only the Arctic 8 countries who were eligible to join Arctic. But because there was a big demand coming from also from Asia and from other European countries joining, the Arctic was opened also for non-Arctic countries. And currently we have members from Japan, China, South Korea, and of course from several other European countries. Basically all Arctic and non-Arctic members, they have the same rights. They can establish thematic networks and they can join all the activities. There are only some strategic voting and strategic issues that Arctic members can do. So it's very, very minor, very little difference between the Arctic and non-Arctic members. So our vision is really to be a strong, engaged, informed, and dynamic North. And we do that by creating better lives and environments for all Northerners. And we have just recently renewed our strategy and also our 2030 goals. And what we do is that we in education, we increased and promote the unique and relevant educational opportunities for Northerners throughout academic collaboration exchange. We have, for example, Node-to-Node student mobility program, which is very much used, although obviously now with COVID pandemic, that is not the case. We build, share, and apply knowledge through our member contributions and in collaborations in research and science, as well as Indigenous and traditional knowledge. Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous participation is very important for Arctic. And we have, for example, Indigenous Vice President within our organization, and we have Indigenous Issues Committee as well. So that is something that is what we very often end up promoting and making sure that in all Arctic statements and paperworks and also in EU policy and so on, the people in the Arctic are also taken into account. We aim at growing and dynamic membership of higher institutions and also other relevant organizations. We strengthen our recognitions as a regionally and globally leading organization, representing the whole circumpolar higher education. And we try to secure the funding and other resources for our members. We are guided by our values and motto, of course. And the format, the platform and tool for all this cooperation and really going towards this goal and making this everything happen is the thematic networks. This is an area that was established in 2005, and I have been working with that since then because I was asked to kind of develop the whole concept and get it work, and I'm still working with the thematic networks. We have a specific office in Oulu, where I come from, and my role is also to handle the cooperation and networking activities within UArctic. So thematic networks is and are groups of UArctic members who work together for a common goal. We have 3 pillars, 3 things that we like networks to do. First is obviously the education, which is research-based, so research is second, and then of course the knowledge sharing. And this is actually the photo that was taken from our last face-to-face thematic network leaders meeting in Saskatoon in June 2019. We tend to meet annually, but obviously we haven't been able to do so for a few years now. We have currently 61 thematic networks, and all networks, they are independent. They make their own terms of reference. They have their own goals and focus. Some are more concentrating on pure science, like Arctic Boreal Hub, which is connected to PEX. And then there are indigenous networks like indigenous film, indigenous skills, and so on. We have networks who are very much focusing on student exchange and creating joint educational programs. And we have networks that do purely research and knowledge sharing and publications. And if you wonder about the color codes within these 2 slides, it means that all those with white are the ones that have Russian partners. If you look at the diagram on my right hand, you can see that there are 50 networks and UArctic institutes that have Russian members. UArctic Institute is something that is very close to thematic network. They are just a little bit small, independent, and smaller, and they are endorsed by the Board of Governors, not the UArctic Assembly. Currently, we have 5 of those. The members of the thematic networks and institutes come from 21 countries currently, and there are actually 312 partner organizations involved. And if you do your math, you realize that's much more than we have members within UArctic. And that, of course, what we like to see. Obviously, there is a lot of Arctic research and knowledge done all outside the UArctic members. And we also encourage thematic networks to work with the businesses and industry and other organizations. So the membership is not only purely on science and research and educational organizations, but also within the industry, businesses, and other type of organization, depending on what is the focus of the thematic networks. The only main responsibility of the network is to do the reporting to UArctic and to make sure that they promote UArctic whenever they do something and keep the website updated. You can find all these thematic networks and their contacts and partners from the UArctic website. So what networks do? I mentioned 3 pillars: education, research, and knowledge sharing. And I have a few slides about those just to kind of give you an example of some of the things that networks are doing and have been doing during the past year or so. And first thing I have here is an example of the educational activity, which is Model Arctic Council. I mentioned that most of the networks do education either on PhD and master level. They do the summer and winter schools. They also have a pure degree programs, joint programs, and so on. But Model Arctic Council is something that is done and led by the thematic network with the same name, Model Arctic Council, led by University of Alaska Fairbanks. And what they do is that they organize a student's role play, a simulation of the Arctic Council meetings. The first one was done in 2016 in Fairbanks during the Arctic Council ministerial meeting. The second one was done in Rovaniemi also during the Arctic Council ministerial meeting. And then it was supposed to be held face-to-face in Akureyri 2020, but obviously that was changed to online and they had to do that online. And then the next one is coming up next March in Arkhangelsk during the Russian chairmanship. And actually the application for students is currently open. The deadline is November 5th. And what is unique with this model Arctic Council role play, because I know that there are plenty of these role plays all over the world, is that these actually are held back to back to real Arctic Council meetings. Students get to meet the actual Arctic Council people. They give the statement and declaration to SAOs. They meet them and they really do a difference. The feedback from these Arctic Council role plays has been very positive. Students say that they were able to understand better the governance and structure of the Arctic issues, and it helped for them in their future careers and when they're applying for a position or school or whatever. So it's really good. And it is one way of also doing that capacity building and also to building the next generation in the Arctic. So this is one good example of one of the types of the educational activities that is done within the thematic networks. Then there's of course a lot of research, conferences, workshop sessions, and also exhibitions, because we do have also thematic networks that work on arts and design. We have also a thematic network that works on music, by the way. And in 2020, there were 109 joint research projects reported to us, and I think that that's not all we have. And there were 84 sessions and workshops held in 2020, which means that in first few months there were people able to do that online on site, and then of course it would change completely different. And I have here just a few examples of different types of the activities, and actually the Arran and OOPS on the Sami education is part of the network that we have a representation here as well. So what networks do? They do big congresses like Arctic Arts Summit, which was held in Rovaniemi in June 2019, with also the educational ministries on site. They do speak talks in the other organizations, and there are coming up, I think, the first big on-site and online event in Helsinki in December this year. Then last slide about what activities we have, and as an example about the joint publications, proceedings, books, and so on. I have two books that are more or less published annually. The Arctic Yearbook is actually celebrating this year its 20th anniversary. It's done by one of the thematic networks, and it is an annual peer-reviewed, quite thick publications currently actually, and it's published online. And it has become a really kind of a nice place to show and write about your research on specific themes. Then the current developments in Arctic law is also something that is published annually. It's done by the Polar Law and Arctic law, and it's most often based on Polar Law Symposium. Then as a couple examples of different types of the publications, obviously the proceedings of the workshop is one thing, and then there's also a lot of special journals and publications and peer-reviewed articles published by the thematic networks and their members. So these are kind of the basic things that networks do. What we of course do is that we do a lot with partnerships. As already mentioned, we have a very close cooperation with IASC, but also with YASA. And all these organizations mentioned here are the ones that we have MOUs. We are also an Arctic Council observer, as is IASC and YASA, and we have often in the past written the joint statements and kind of a work together. For example, for the ICARP 3, we had a joint statement to Arctic Council as well. What is coming up, as already mentioned by Henry, is that there's actually 4th international conference on Arctic research training planning started up, and Arctic is one of the partners, as already noted, and that will happen in 2025. And that will also be used as partially for the development of the next International Polar Year, which will happen in 2032 and 33. Arctic is very strongly engaged in both of these activities, and our role is really to make sure that co-production of knowledge and making sure that societal relevance and local and indigenous people and communities are taken into account, and all the things that are planned and done in the future is done in the mutual beneficial relationship and is really kind of respecting the people who live in the region. The partnership and the cooperation we do in Arctic is done in a way in two levels. We have several thematic networks that also work within these. They are members in IAS working groups, for example, or some of their representatives are members in IAS working groups. They are members in NASA, and they are also working in some of the Arctic Council working groups. We have representatives in all Arctic Council working groups, and then there are also a lot of projects that are endorsed by Arctic Council that Arctic thematic networks are working in. So that's a kind of a ground level, a doers level, the science research type of cooperation that goes on. Then there's this higher level that we do in leadership of the Arctic. We are also partnering with for example, with Arctic parliamentarians and Northern Forum and so on. And we see this as a really important venue also, the keeping up the importance of the Arctic education and doing that for the people in the North and for the young generation. As a final promotion, I have also a slide about coming up to congresses. So in 2016, we held the very first Arctic Congress in St. Petersburg. And it was such a success that we decided that we will continue that. And in that event and Congress, it was decided that after it, every Congress will be held in the country which hosts the Arctic Council chairmanship, which meant that in 2018, we had a Congress in Finland. In 2020, we were supposed to have that in Reykjavik in Iceland. We had to postpone that to May, back-to-back with the Arctic Council ministerial meeting, and in the end we had to do that online. And I'm happy to say that the next Congress will be held in Moscow, hosted by the Lomonosov State Moscow University in October 4 to 7, just prior to this science festival that we are now actually taking part in. So I'm really happy about that. And we are really hoping that we would have a face-to-face Congress, but of course we are also thinking about the hybrid options. We have call for sessions open currently, and it will be closed in November 15th. One note still that all these congresses that have been held during the Arctic Council chairmanship, it also has meant that these events are part of the Arctic Council events. So we are officially working together with the Arctic Council for these congresses, and we'll also have the same cooperation in Moscow as well. If you have any questions, you are free to contact me or go to the website, or if you have any questions, and I can see that there's one chat. That was Henry. Good. So thanks. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Kirsi. I think at that point we don't have anyone online in Zoom, but rather audience watching us broadcasted. So yeah, we're going to share details with the audience. Yeah, I wanted to say something. We are very happy to host the Arctic Congress in Moscow, and very much looking forward to it. And it would be amazing to have actually the next science festival, Arctic sessions, in the next year to be as the follow-up of the Arctic Congress as well. Just to,
it is.
Yeah,
it will be held back to back. Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep in mind. Yeah, thank you so much, and I very much enjoyed your comment, because I came, as I said, I came from the other session, and I left just when we ended up discussion on where we should actually call it the overall cooperation, Northern cooperation or Arctic cooperation. So it's quite an interesting comment from you that we shouldn't perceive this as a latitude, but rather as attitude. It's nice to hear about that. And also, thank you so much for mentioning the tight cooperation and the inclusion of the EU Arctic representatives and researchers to working groups of the Arctic Council. And I think that we have the same thing for the IASC as well, because members of IASC working groups and our Arctic IASC Council also are the parts of the Arctic Council working groups as well. And it's great to see such a tight cooperation at the international level. So as I usually say, the Arctic international scene is quite not that large as it can be seen from the other parts of the world, but rather we know each other for quite some time, with a good way. What I want to ask all of you, and also Mairi, just to jump into our discussion as well, because she's very good expert in education, is that the legacy, since we have the session called Legacy of Knowledge, and Kirsi and Henry has already mentioned regarding the transfer of knowledge, how it happens in your organizations, the transfer of knowledge. For me, the knowledge is a very interesting thing because it's yeah. Oh, you have to go. Okay. Bye-bye, Henry. Thank you so much.
Apologies, but thank you very much. And thank you again for the opportunity. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye,
Thank
Henry.
you, Henry.
Bye.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah. So maybe I will be able to say regarding the knowledge transfer for Henry, since I am a part of the IASC secretariat, but I'm not quite sure. But yeah, for me, knowledge is something which is very dynamic thing, which requires the co-production, the transfer, and then the application. We had this discussion with our colleagues at the different sessions, and it would be nice to hear from you a little bit regarding how the knowledge, how we can apply the knowledge, how we can transfer it to the end users, and do we have the end users of knowledge of this at this Arctic scene, Arctic agenda? Because Arctic has very interesting, the thematic networks itself, this let's call it mechanism. Thematic networks is a great platform for knowledge transfer, as you have mentioned, the knowledge co-production, as you have mentioned, and also IASC has quite a few initiatives. But what is the application of knowledge?
It's education, and I think it goes directly to the education. It goes to the special programs, and it goes to the PhD training, and it goes to that, as well as obviously if you have publications and you share and you create outreach, you kind of use that knowledge and you share that. But it's also used in the politics, like for example, an EU Arctic policy. We have commented on that as well, and also some other similar types of thing. Arctic Ministerial, we have also Arctic was part of that, and so we kind of use that in many ways. But I think Mairi has also comments.
Yes, I think for knowledge I'll speak about two things: knowledge creation and also knowledge transfer. I think that this afternoon, what we've seen are two organizations that have been key in the Arctic and in the North, that have actually allowed for a much more informed knowledge creation. I think that the kind of working groups, but also the thematic networks in both of those organizations have allowed us to be much more informed about our knowledge creation, because I think many of the countries and organizations around the Arctic are facing the same challenges. So it doesn't matter what discipline you're in. I think working through these groups and working collaboratively with them, putting in joint funding applications, and creating the research projects with a number of countries in mind means that it's a much more informed knowledge creation. But I think it also means that there's a much more informed knowledge impact once you're finished. And I suppose I'm speaking particularly from education here, that I think one of the things that I've noticed in my career is that when you are developing research projects, I think more and more you are expected to think about your target audience at the end. And I think that's where I really welcome more emphasis on Indigenous and traditional communities being involved, not just as, well, we'll tell them about it at the end, but actually being in at the decision making at the beginning. So within education, for example, we would never really develop a research project now without involving teachers and going, would this be useful to you? Are we doing the right thing? Are we looking at the right challenges? And more now, we will also ask children and young people, is this the kind of thing that we should be researching? So I think that also can increase the impact, because there's no point in educational research unless you actually change educational provision for the better at the end of it, or at least work out what's going wrong. So I think, I really do think that these two organisations have contributed significantly to both knowledge creation and transfer.
Mm. And I should have noted that one of the newest thematic networks is the Children of the Arctic, which works with the children. So that is kind of, I'm really excited about that, because they already worked a lot very nicely, and they particularly work with the Indigenous, because it's hosted by the Greenland.
Yeah. And I think as well, having that thematic network strengthens the work, because I think there's a global trend towards working with very young children as well, and seeing children as knowledgeable in their own lives, and therefore having something to contribute towards research. So having that new thematic network. I should mention one other thing that we have found really helpful in our thematic network is cross-thematic networks, working together with other thematic networks. So working with Children of the Arctic, or with one of the arts-based ones, or indeed working with one of the natural science thematic networks is really helpful, because it brings two sets of experts together to work in ways that there are many other organizations would not allow that. You become quite siloed sometimes in your discipline. And again, I think the UArctic allows that very easily through Kersey. But also I noticed that fellowship scheme that Henry was speaking about together, getting early career researchers, yes, supporting them, but also putting different disciplines together to work at the very beginning of a research career is really important for the future of all science, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marie. And I think that actually both organizations not only are absolutely amazing in terms of creating the platform for interdisciplinary international communication, but also to the transfer of knowledge, as we say, to legacy of knowledge, and to implement all those results that we have from the previous international polar year. And it's very interesting to see how it will work for the following polar year that Kirsi has mentioned about, because even though it is like 10 years ahead, like 10 or 11 years ahead, but the earlier planning we have, the best I think we will have as a result. And also we have at the end of the session on Monday, we had this thought that actually having children starting to be engaged in science, and the education is a very interesting thing, and for researchers as well, because scientists, from my knowledge, scientists not always have this simple thinking. We used to make it very too complicated, everything, to overcomplicate things. So at times, as I said at the previous session, at times it's not about what we can do for children, but what they can do for us, because they actually require us to think simply to different things in this world. Yeah. So if you have any other questions or any other comments, please go ahead, and we still have quite some time to share. Yeah.
I wanted to give you one example of that school children thing, because we have a permafrost association, and there's also a thematic network on permafrost. And Kenji Yoshikawa, who was leading that earlier, he was very keen on also working with the school children, and he had a lot of projects both in Alaska and also in Yakutia, where the school kids were actually measuring the permafrost and collecting the data, in a way doing the citizen science in their own terms, obviously, on what they can do. And he came up with the really nice books about the permafrost and how it distributes, and all the villages where the kids were measuring that and what were the results. So that was a really great example on how he was kind of sharing the knowledge about the permafrost, why it's important, what is happening, and doing that through the children, because you all know that kids come home and they tell it home to the parents that that's my teacher told me this and that, and that is something. So they have a much more influence actually than you would maybe think.
And I think they can also be a bridge into some communities for us, because in so many of our northern communities, the elders are possessors of knowledge. You know, you were speaking about thinking back to previous polar years, but many of our elders in our communities can think back to, you know, mid the last century. And I think, for example, with climate change, there's real knowledge with our elders and understanding that perhaps isn't that pure science knowledge, but they have the knowledge of the impact that it's had on their communities and on their lifestyles, the way that they work. I can think of my own community at home in Scotland, where, you know, crofting is a very distinctive kind of agriculture. But when I talk to the elders in the village, they can tell us how, you know, the weather has changed. So we've had to change the way that we croft. And I think that young people, there is a lot of knowledge around young people being able to talk to old people. And I think our young people are often that bridge into that elder knowledge that can then contribute it towards discussions around things like climate change and cultural change within our countries. Yeah.
Yeah, agree and support all your points. And thank you so much for such a great conversation, such a great discussion. Thank you for your time. And I just like to summarize a little bit, saying that it's great to see how the knowledge on our Earth, not only in the Arctic, but on our Earth is transferred, co-produced, and that we all understand actually that we need to do all these parts of the knowledge, to share knowledge, which is very important, not only for the Arctic, but other geographical parts of our Earth as well. Yeah, thank you so much. And again, as Kirsi said, we would like to invite everyone to Arctic Congress next year in Moscow. And it was a great pleasure to host all of you and to have all of you here at this session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Yeah.
Nice to
Bye-bye.
see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.